Dim the light, speak slowly with a low, eerie tone. It was a rainy night in October, the kind of night where the sky seemed to weep endlessly and the streets were deserted, save for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the dark, stormy sky. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, creating a symphony of sound that echoed through the empty streets. Emma was alone at home, the rain pattering against her window as she brushed her hair in front of her bedroom mirror. The rhythmic sound of the rain was usually a source of comfort for her, a soothing backdrop to her nightly routine. She loved the way the raindrops danced on the glass, creating intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of their own.
She loved the calm silence that usually came with a rainy evening. It was a time for reflection, for unwinding after a long day. The rain had a way of washing away the worries of the world, leaving behind a sense of peace and tranquility. But tonight, the rain felt different. It was as if the storm carried with it a sense of unease, a whisper of something lurking in the shadows. But tonight, something felt wrong. The usual comfort of the rain was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that there was something or someone lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. The flickering light in the hallway only added to her unease, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. She kept feeling like she wasn't alone. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains, seemed amplified in the silence of the house. Her heart raced as she turned around nervously, half expecting to see a figure standing behind her. But the room was empty, save for the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. She could sense something, almost hear a faint whisper in the air, even though the house was silent. It was as if the very walls were trying to communicate with her, to warn her of an unseen presence. She strained her ears, trying to catch any sound that might explain the feeling of being watched. But all she could hear was the relentless patter of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. She ignored it, chalking it up to her imagination. After all, it was just a stormy night, and the mind had a way of playing tricks on you in the dark. She tried to focus on her task, brushing her hair with deliberate strokes, hoping to calm her racing thoughts. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that refused to be banished by the light of reason. Emma walked to the window, her reflection merging with the rain-soaked glass. She stared out into the night, the storm raging on with unabated fury. The world outside seemed both familiar and alien, a place where anything could happen. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, feeling the chills seep into her skin, grounding her in the reality of the moment. The rain continued to fall, each drop a tiny reminder of the storm's power. Lightning flashed, illuminating the street for a brief moment, revealing nothing but emptiness. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, a nagging sensation that refused to be ignored. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, reminding herself that it was just a storm, and she was safe inside her home. She turned away from the window, determined to shake off the fear that clung to her like a second skin. She walked back to her room, each step a testament to her resolve. The storm might rage outside, but inside she would find her peace. She would not let the shadows of the night dictate her emotions. With a final glance at the mirror, she resumed brushing her hair, the rhythmic strokes a lullaby to her anxious mind. Settling onto her bed, Emma picked up a book, hoping to lose herself in its pages. The rain continued to patter against the window, a constant reminder of the storm outside. But within the world of her book, she found solace, a temporary escape from the unease that had gripped her. The night might be dark and stormy, but within the pages of her book, she found a light that guided her through the shadows. As she read, the tension slowly ebbed away, replaced by the familiar comfort of a good story. The rain outside became a distant murmur, a backdrop to the adventures unfolding in her book. Emma's face relaxed, her earlier fears forgotten in the embrace of the narrative. The storm might rage on, but within her room she had found her sanctuary, a place where the shadows could not reach her.
But then, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as the only source of light came from the phone screen. The sudden noise startled her, pulling her out of her thoughts. She'd been sitting alone, lost in the quiet of the night, when the unexpected vibration jolted her back to reality.
A text? This late? Hold for a moment. Emma's mind raced. Who could be texting her at this hour? She hesitated for a second, her fingers hovering over the screen. The digital clock on her nightstand read 2:13 a.m. It was an odd time for anyone to be sending messages.
She looked at her phone, expecting a message from her friend or a late-night ad. Maybe it was a wrong number, or perhaps one of her friends had sent a message by mistake. She unlocked her phone, her eyes scanning the screen for any familiar names or numbers, but the text was from herself. The message read, "Don't look in the mirror." Her breath caught in her throat. The message was brief, but it sent a wave of unease washing over her. How could this be? She checked the sender's number again, but it was unmistakably her own.
Emma's heart skipped a beat, a chill racing down her spine. She felt a cold sweat forming on her forehead. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows more menacing. She clutched her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The message was so cryptic, so unsettling. She glanced around, certain someone must be playing a prank. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room, searching for any sign of movement. Was someone watching her? The thought made her skin crawl. She felt an overwhelming urge to check the mirrors in her house, but the message's warning echoed in her mind. Her hands shook as she typed back, "Who is this?" But there was no reply. She waited, staring at the screen, hoping for an answer. Minutes passed, but the phone remained silent. The eerie stillness of the room was almost unbearable. She felt trapped, caught in a web of fear and confusion. What did the message mean, and why had it come from her own number? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Emma began to pace, her mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a hacker, or perhaps a glitch in the system? She considered calling someone, but who would believe her? The message was so bizarre, so out of the ordinary. She felt isolated, alone in her fear. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, each minute feeling like an eternity. She checked her phone again, but there were no new messages. The silence was deafening. She felt a mix of frustration and fear. What was she supposed to do? The warning not to look in the mirror was haunting her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if she did. Exhausted and scared, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her head in her hands. She felt drained, both physically and emotionally. The night's events had taken a toll on her. She needed to rest, but how could she sleep with such a disturbing message lingering in her mind? She decided to stay awake, to keep her guard up. The night was far from over, and she had a feeling that the mystery was just beginning.
Instead, she felt a strange pull to the mirror, as though something was watching her from the other side. She fought the urge to look. Her own reflection had always felt comforting, familiar, but now it felt different, foreign, sinister, like it was waiting for her to slip up and stare.
After a minute, she couldn't resist anymore. The pull of the mirror was too strong, an invisible force drawing her closer despite the dread that filled her heart. She had always felt a strange connection to mirrors, but tonight it was different. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, and the silence of the room seemed to amplify the pounding of her heart. She glanced up at the mirror, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. The reflection staring back at her was familiar yet foreign, a distorted version of herself that seemed to hold secrets she wasn't ready to uncover. Her breath hitched as she took a step closer, unable to tear her gaze away.
And there she was. But something was wrong. The room around her seemed to darken, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a mere image. It felt alive, pulsating with a sinister energy that sent chills down her spine. Her reflection didn't look scared, it was smiling. But Emma wasn't smiling. The grin on the other side of the glass was twisted, almost mocking, as if it knew something she didn't. It was a smile that didn't belong to her. A smile that spoke of dark intentions and hidden truths. Her reflection slowly raised a hand, pointing directly at her. The gesture was deliberate, almost accusatory, and Emma felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. It was as if the reflection was trying to communicate, to convey a message that she couldn't quite grasp. Emma backed away, heart pounding, and covered her eyes, hoping it was all a trick of her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the nightmare to end. But the image of that sinister smile was burned into her memory. She could still feel the weight of the reflection's gaze, a heavy presence that refused to be ignored. But when she peeked again, her reflection was now closer, as if it had stepped right up to the glass, inches away, its smile wider, stretching unnaturally across its face. The proximity was suffocating, and Emma felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The reflection's eyes bore into hers, filled with a malevolent glee that made her skin crawl. Then it mouthed two words, "Switch places." The words were silent, but their meaning was clear, echoing in her mind like a sinister chant. Emma's heart raced as she tried to comprehend the demand. The reflection's lips moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. The idea of switching places with this twisted version of herself was terrifying, a fate worse than any nightmare she could imagine. She shook her head, stepping back from the mirror, her mind racing with fear and confusion. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a trick of the light. But the reflection's eyes followed her every move, unblinking and relentless. Desperately, she looked around the room, searching for an escape, a way to break free from the mirror's hold. But the walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. There was no way out. The reflection began to laugh silently, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The soundless laughter was more terrifying than any scream, a chilling reminder of the power it held over her. Emma felt her knees weaken, her resolve crumbling under the weight of the reflection's demand. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the mirror, her fingers inches away from the cold glass. She could feel the pull, a magnetic force drawing her closer, urging her to give in. The reflection's smile widened, its eyes gleaming with anticipation. As her hand made contact with the mirror, the reflection's hand met hers on the other side. The glass was cold, but she could feel a strange warmth emanating from the reflection's touch. It was as if the barrier between them was thinning, the line between reality and the mirror world blurring. Emma took a deep breath, her face filled with determination. She couldn't let the reflection win. She had to fight, to reclaim her life and her identity. With a surge of courage, she pressed her hand harder against the glass, willing herself to break free from the mirror's grip. The reflection's smile began to fade, replaced by a look of surprise. It hadn't expected her to resist, to fight back with such determination. Emma could see the fear in its eyes, a mirror image of her own. With a final burst of strength, she pulled her hand away from the mirror, stepping back with a look of triumph. The reflection's image wavered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Emma watched as it slowly faded away, the sinister smile disappearing into the darkness. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection looking normal once more. The room seemed brighter, the shadows retreating as the oppressive presence lifted. Emma took a deep breath, relief washing over her. She had faced the darkness and won. As she walked away from the mirror, she glanced back one last time, a sense of closure settling over her. The reflection was just that, a reflection, and she was in control of her own destiny. The mirror's demand had been a test, and she had passed with flying colours. Emma gasped, stumbling backward, but before she could turn and run, she felt an icy hand on her shoulder. It was cold as death, gripping her tightly, pulling her back toward the mirror. And in that instant, the lights went out. Her scream echoed through the house, swallowed by the darkness. The next morning, her parents found her room empty. Only her mirror remained, and in its reflection was Emma, her face frozen in a silent scream, staring out, forever trapped on the other side. Pause for effect. This story plays on the fear of mirrors and the idea of reflections with lives of their own. You can stretch out the pauses, add dramatic sound effects, or even dim the lights to make it even scarier. Enjoy the chills.